Hi everyone, this is Elias Martin from CollectingJapanesePrints.com. Welcome to Woodblock Wednesday, where every Wednesday at 1 o'clock we get together and discuss Japanese prints and history and anything else that relates to Japanese art. I want to thank all of you for joining me once again. I had a really busy couple weeks. I think everyone, has really wrapped up with the holidays. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving, and just trying to get my website updated. And I'm happy to report that this morning I was able to go live with my latest exhibition. It's Line of Descent, the Yoshida Woodblock Prints. So it's basically, the exhibition traces the Yoshida family line from Hiroshi Yoshida and Fujio Yoshida down through a couple generations. And, the exhibition features work by those two artists, as well as Chizuko Yoshida, who married into the Yoshida family. She married Hodaka Yoshida, the youngest son of the family, and Toshi Yoshida. I think the exhibition, well, first of all, I think there's some really great pieces in the exhibition. So if you haven't had a chance, and I'm sure you haven't because it just went live, I invite you to go to my website, CollectingJapanesePrints.com, and click on Line of Descent, and you'll see all of these great prints. And I spent a lot of time also writing about each print. There's a lot of information there. It's not just a bunch of prints that are for sale. Yes, they are, but also there's a lot of information. And I think that's what we tried to do on my website. Inform the public, collectors, connoisseurs with some information that you may not come across in references. There's a lot of information there, and I invite you to have a look. Just to give you a preview, or to wet your whistle on the group of prints I have online, I put together a collection of prints on my table here, one by each artist that is represented in the exhibition, and we can discuss them. So without further ado, let's go to the table. So I thought it would be a good idea to bring out this Hiroshi Yoshida print. If for no other reason, I mean, it's stunning, it's really beautiful, but the size of this work is really impressive. So for those of you, and I'll point out to the work right next to it by Fujio Yoshida, his wife, this is a standard Oban size print. So if you're familiar with Oban size prints in Hiroshi Yoshida's work, this is what normally Yoshida produced, as well as all the other artists, with some exceptions. But, this is standard in Shinhanga. Here, you could fit 3 Oban-sized prints going across. So that is how large and impressive this work is. It's a design, as I said, by Hiroshi Yoshida, and it features Hodaka Yama, and it's called Hodaka Yama After the Rain. And so what you see here is this beautiful cliff, or the mountain side of Hodaka Yama, and the colors that are on the mountain that are reflected throughout the top portion. There's this wonderful purple and blue and some grays, and it's richly printed. You could see the top part here. It almost looks like you could just take a spoon and cake those colors up. It's so thickly applied. It's so expressive. It's so beautiful. And another area here that I think is really neat in the print is this area here where there's a lot of, it looks like fog coming in, and this was done by bokashi, a Japanese printing technique where you apply a bit of the color onto the block, and then you sort of take a brush and wipe it down to get this really fuzzy effect where the color, where there's a gradual sort of change from light to dark. And of course, the foreground, I think, is interesting because it's done more in the style of a watercolor. And you could see the trees here, and that's sort of his typical style. His woodblock printing style is sort of a marriage of watercolors and oil painting, but done in woodblock print form. And excuse me, Hiroshi Yoshida was an accomplished oil painter and watercolorist, and you see his originals come up for sale every so often, and a lot of his prints are based on these originals. The his oils and watercolors, many of them, most of them, I could say, were done on site out in the plein air, and so the print really reads very realistic, atmospheric, very impressive. And the size of it really opens up the design. And it's interesting, this foreground, the style of the foreground is not exactly the style of the background. And there's this really interesting sort of tension between this stark realism in the background, and then this almost, it's watercolor like, but it's not as realistic. But I mean, I think it works. It's just really interesting. So I'm going to stop talking for a little bit, and I'm going to zoom in so you can enjoy the print. And we'll point out here the titles in pencil. There is a reddish-brown Jizuri seal, which indicates the print was executed under Hiroshi Yoshida's strict supervision. And there is his signature here. Now, I should say a couple of words about Jizuri seals. And basically, a Jizuri seal, or Jizuri just means self-printed or self-executed, self-done. But in Hiroshi Yoshida's case, the vast majority of prints that bear a Jizuri seal, Yoshida didn't print those prints himself. He had a studio. Now, I believe, and a few other people, some scholars and collectors also believe that early on, Yoshida did print his prints, particularly the ones that had the most variations in the printing. And, he was just trying to figure out how to best produce these designs artistically, but also keeping in line with the economic issues and making sure that he could produce prints that were sustainable for his business. So the earliest printings, especially the ones with the trial seal, a lot of those were printed by the artist himself. But by and large, the vast majority that have Jizuri were not printed by him, but printed by his studio. And this is a stamp that was applied to it after the artist examined the artwork, the particular print, and decided, yes, this is precisely up to my standards, the quality that we set forth to produce. And so this was approved. A lot of his prints are not signed in pencil. And so because a lot of the pencil signed pieces went out west, and Westerners were buying them, and so Westerners are used to seeing signatures, so he added those signatures. But I would say a third of the prints I see have no pencil signature. Sometimes I have a pencil a title. Sometimes I don't have any title. And what the most important seal is this seal, because it tells you that he oversaw the process. Now, there's always an exception to the rule. And there are certain designs by Hiroshi Yoshida, that do not have Jizuri seals. They tend to be smaller Chuban-sized prints that he produced in smaller quantities. And they were never issued with Jizuri seals. Some of them were never issued with pencil signatures. But the good news is, as far as I know, at least at this point, they haven't been reproduced, so you can only find them in the impressions that were done during his lifetime. So that's sort of the good news, at least for now. So, and then some designs have pencil signatures. So I have a design of New York in this exhibition. It does not have a Jazuri seal, but it has a pencil signature. Some have stamp signatures, but again, they were never produced posthumously or after his death, so there's no need to worry about later printings versus earlier printings. But I wanted to put that out there for those of you who are interested in Yoshida's work and his process and how he produced prints and which ones are lifetime and which ones are later. And the difference between a lifetime impression and a later impression can be thousands of dollars, and in some cases many, many thousands of dollars. Depends on the design. So wanted to point that out. So the next print I'll show you, and I think these two look really nice together. This very similar palette. These purples are kind of in the mountain. I don't know if you can tell, but this one is by his wife Fujio Yoshida, and she was also an accomplished painter, oil painter, and watercolorist. She traveled with Hiroshi, her husband, all around the world. And they worked side by side. They were outside painting in the plein air method. And basically, her work, her oils and watercolors are very similar to Hiroshi Yoshida's. I actually think she could have been a better watercolorist. There's some designs or some of her watercolors where I just think, wow, she got the better of him on certain designs. So she was great. She was great. Her work also comes up. The original work comes up for sale here and there, not as often as Hiroshi Yoshida's. His does come up, especially in Japan. But her work it's interesting because she did a few woodblock prints when she was working with her husband. But Yoshida passed in 1950. And Hiroshi Yoshida was not a fan of abstraction or sort of a modernist sort of sensibility to artwork. He was very traditional. Loved representational pieces, and experimented within those confines. But he never went beyond representational work. And when he passed away, I think Fujio felt in some ways liberated to do some work that was a departure of what she was doing previously. And in this piece, though it's very beautiful, stylistically, it owes a lot to, I think, the work of Georgia O'Keeffe. And some of them are more abstract than others, but that you could see them as an extreme close-up of flowers or vegetables or whatever she's representing. And here, this design is called Flowering Kale. So it's of kale, and there's this artistic design to it. It's very lyrical. It's not accurate per se, but it's still not completely abstract. So she's still kind of holding on to representational ideas and designs, but adding a lot of interpretive she adds her own twist to it, of course. And they're striking. They're all very beautiful, and it also shows her versatility, her versatile working methods, from doing representational work, like what she was doing with her husband, to doing something different. And so this is a stunning work by her. I have 4 of her designs from this series on my website. And the next piece. Oh, I should actually zoom in so you could kind of see the colors and the printing, which is very rich. And we have the title in pencil and her signature. There's a seal there. Signature dated 1954. So I should also say that it seems that Fujio was also very influenced by her son and Hodaka, whose work I have here, and his wife Chizuko. And Chizuko was an artist in her own right before she met Hodaka. just like Fujio. Fujio was an artist and then married Hiroshi Yoshida. But Chizuko was interested in printmaking and oil painting and worked with a variety of different artists. And one of the artists that she studied with was Onchi, Koshiro Onchi, and who happens to be one of my favorite artists and influenced a great deal of other artists. And so in this particular print, we have Chizuko working in sort of Onchi's experimental process of taking found objects. This is a string. I'm not quite sure what this is, but it has a really wonderful texture. And I'll zoom in so you could see some more string and other found objects. And she created this design by inking those things and impressing them into paper, maybe attaching them to a woodblock matrix. But basically, this is a monoprint. It was done in 1954, the same year as this Fujio print. And she titles it Composition. There's her signature, there's the year, the month is February. And, there's this really wonderful spontaneous quality to it. It's whimsical. There's a lot of, the colors are very, playful. And so this is a great piece. And also on my site, this one has sold, but, it really shows Chizuko's early work, particularly when she was working with Onchi. You could see this connection. Now, if you go to my website, I show an Onchi work that was done in the same year with the same aesthetic, the same sort of experimental quality to it. Now, obviously, the design's very different, but it shows her early connection to Onchi. And then she goes on to do different things. But this is a really wonderful work that's really caught in this time period of experimentation. So her husband, Hodaka, oh, actually, I should zoom in so you could see. I keep skipping that. This print, as I said, has really wonderful texture. There's all these different elements in the print with texture and color. And it's interesting. This is about the same color as there. And of course, there's a little bit of purple in there. So, I guess I'm keeping this purple theme going, except these two prints have no purple. And this print is by Hodaka Yoshida, Chizuko's husband. Hodaka was the youngest son in the Yoshida family. He was the son of Fujio and Hiroshi Yoshida. And I'm talking about him first because I put him next to his wife's work. We'll talk about Toshi, the oldest. But it was interesting. His story's interesting. Hiroshi and Fujio Yoshida encouraged him to study or pursue science, become a scientist or a doctor. But he, like Toshi, his brother, was very interested in art. It was very much part of their life. The Yoshida studios were right next to where they lived, and it was in his life all the time. And so he showed an early interest in art, and at some point he basically rebelled against his father and mother's wishes. I would imagine it's more Hiroshi than his mom. And he's like, no, I'm going to become an artist. And not just that, he was an artist that experimented really early in his career with abstraction and other, other forms of making art that his father certainly would not have approved when he was alive. This print is a late 50s. It's 56, so not that late. And at this point, he was already making abstraction. But in this particular case, it's a beautiful, very elegant scene of a sort of rock garden that leads to a tea house. It has a really strong mid-century modern vibe to it, it's just a stunning work. The size of it, and I'm going to take an Oban size print so you could see the comparison. So it's much larger, and the large margins really add to the composition, which is interesting. Most people don't often think how the margins contribute to the design of a work. And in here, the margins definitely amplify the design. The design being narrow, it almost has kind of a scroll-like effect because the design is as narrow as a scroll, and the size of the margins echo the mounting of a scroll, which is kind of neat, which plays on the theme of this being, as the subject is a tea house, or where the tea ceremony occurs, and artwork like scrolls are prominently displayed in a venue where there is a tea ceremony that happens. So, that all is very connected. And also the aesthetics of the tea ceremony are austere, they're very focused and concentrated, but edited. So there isn't a lot going on. Each stone is placed in a particular way to amplify the effect that it does have on the design. And so I think he did a really great job of producing a work that really speaks to the idea, not just this is a tea house, but the aesthetic of the tea ceremony. So that's pretty much present here. So I think that's really neat. And another work, I should zoom in. I keep forgetting. I just want to share all these pieces with you, and I forget to zoom in. This work, though, it's very, like I said, it's edited. It's simple. It's very simple, but very elegant. But the surface has this really wonderful, stone-like quality to it. So it reads like this is sand in areas and stones, and so that surface really comes through in how he treated the blocks to produce this effect. All right, so the last print that I'll discuss in this group that represents artists in my current exhibition online is Toshi Yoshida. And Toshi was actually the oldest of the two Yoshida boys. And his story is interesting too. It's very different from Hodaka's. Toshi had a medical issue when he was a kid. And I think one of his legs was paralyzed for a short period of time. And I don't think he had polio, but there was something going on with him. And he stayed home. He was basically homeschooled. And he spent a lot of his time drawing animals and pets and birds that, he could observe from his window. And then, as time passed and he was able to be more mobile, he kind of spent some time in the family studio, in the print studio. And, it was one of those things, he just grew into it. And in this print, though it's not an early work, Toshi started doing prints in the mid 30s. He carved some of the blocks for his father's prints. Now, this was not done by Toshi, but it's an example of a typical Hiroshi Yoshida print, and Toshi was very well versed in his. So basically, he mastered that kind of style, but he incorporated his own elements. And what Toshi, I think, and these are my opinions, but I think what he's really best known for is, I think, movement in his prints. Some of his best designs have this wonderful lyrical sense of movement. And he also, I think some of his best pieces show animals. And that goes back to his early years as a child, drawing these animals and observing their movements and observing them in a natural habitat. And so here what we have is these cranes. This print is called Tancho Crane, and it was done here it is, 1988. It's a late work. Toshi passed away in the 90s. And let me zoom in so you can see. But the amount of carving that's in the background is astonishing for a design that's not as complicated at first blush. You see it, and it's about these birds. But to achieve the effect of these birds almost sort of lifting off, the background, all of these lines were carved, and they're really squiggly, but very detailed as well. And so, but it's very, there's a really wonderful sense of movement, as I said. The other thing I think about this print that I think is interesting is it almost reminds me, sort of, there's a cinema, it almost reminds me of an effect you see in the cinema where this bird could be interpreted as the same one at different moments as it's sort of moving through this space. Now, you could read this as 5 birds, but also as 1 bird. And so there's this really wonderful effect that the artist creates using this bird. So I'll show it to you this way. So another thing I should say about this print is this is a late work by Toshi, and a lot of his prints from this period are in this format. It's sort of a long format. It's horizontal. These designs are always horizontal. And just to give you a sense of what it looks like, here's an Oban size print, and there's a lot more to it. And this size is very effective, I think, for a lot of his designs, where he shows animals sort of roaming across a plain. He traveled to Africa, all over the world, really, but there's certain designs that he did in Africa that he shows antelope and other animals indigenous to that area running across, and it's amazing that the effects that he could achieve in a woodblock print, because they have a really wonderful sense of motion. In this print, I think it's one of his masterpieces. It's stunning, it's beautiful, it's graceful, but again, that sense of movement is actually what makes it for me. So let me just kind of pan out so you could kind of see again what we discussed. And for those of you who just are joining us, I encourage you to watch the beginning of the video. We discuss all of the artists that are represented in my brand new exhibition online on collectingjapaneseprints.com. We discuss Hiroshi Yoshida, his wife Fujio Yoshida, their daughter-in-law Chizuko Yoshida, Hodaka's wife, Hodaka Yoshida, and then Toshi. And here, let me switch over. So I want to thank all of you for joining me today and every Woodblock Wednesday on where we discuss Japanese prints and paintings. And, I'll have some really interesting things coming up in the coming weeks. But as I said, I encourage you to go on my site, check out the new exhibition. There's some wonderful masterpieces on there. And there's a lot of I actually spent a lot of time researching and writing about each work, which, I encourage you to read and learn more about all of these artists. So thanks again for joining me, and I will see you next week. Thank you again. Bye.